Welcome, everyone. This is Maria Spriggs, and I am pleased to be your host for our newly created 0 to 3 Summer Book Club. So, there's a first time for everything, and here at 0 to 3, we're trying out our first webinar format book club, and I want to take a minute to explain to you all how it will work. First, I'll make some introductions. Then after the hellos, we'll give you all a chance to make comments and or ask the author a question. Think of a passage, chapter, idea, or a case from the book that you'd like to ask a question about or comment on. You'll notice that your microphones are now muted. But if you use the raise your hand feature on your control panel, we will unmute you so that you can ask your question. Or, as an alternate, you can submit your questions through the chat feature and we'll read it aloud for the author to respond. Then we'll close out with a few words from our author. Now let's get started. First, I would like to introduce you all to Julia Richards, who directs our member services team. Go for it, Julia.
Thank you, Maria, and welcome all. It is truly my pleasure to welcome all of our members to the very first book club meeting of the 0 to 3 membership. Before we started, I just wanted to take a minute to talk a little bit about why we started a book club. And it really comes out of the desire that 0 to 3 will be a place and continue to be a membership that not only connects to the organization, not only has opportunity to connect to wonderful people like Alicia Lieberman, not only has a chance to interact with our staff and our resources, but truly and deeply and meaningfully connects with each other. And so the idea of having a live book club meeting really comes out of that idea that not only are we bringing some material and information and an opportunity to sort of think together, but we truly are talking together, thinking together, hearing each other's voices, getting to hear how other people think about and deliberate on these topics, and again, hopefully making some lasting connections that you want to follow up on, that people whose questions you were interested in or who really helped you think in a certain way. So just to say, we're hoping that this is the first chance to begin to build those really real, meaningful, and important connections in your work. And I couldn't be more excited to launch this idea with a dear friend and colleague of many, many years, Dr. Alicia Lieberman, who you can see on our handy webcam right here. Officially, Dr. Lieberman is the Irving B. Harris Endowed Chair in Infant Mental Health, Professor and Vice Chair for Academic Affairs at the University of California, San Francisco, Department of Psychiatry, then the Director of the Child Trauma Research Program at San Francisco General Hospital. She is also a board member at 0 to 3 and has been for as long as I have been around 0 to 3, which is a wonderful gift. Today, of course, we're going to be discussing the updated edition of her groundbreaking book, The Emotional Life of the Toddler. And as you've already been learning, it's really meant to be an in-depth examination of toddlers' emotional development and how to really optimize this stage so that toddlers can develop into emotionally healthy children and adults, if any of us are ever totally emotionally, well put together. So welcome, Alicia.
Thank you so much, Julie.
It is, again, my great gift and privilege to welcome you and to thank you for participating in this way with us. I happen to know that there's a story behind the emotional life of the toddler, a story behind the story of the emotional life of the toddler. And I wonder if you could start us off by sharing that story with us.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for doing this book series. It is very exciting, and thank you for asking me to launch it with you. As you say, there is a story behind this story, and it is a story of efforts at affect regulation. I think that it is not by accident that I wrote The Emotional Life of the Toddler. I've always loved toddlers, and for many years before the first edition was published in 1993, 25 years ago, I would go around the city of San Francisco and other places, writing down my observations of toddlers in my own family, toddlers of my friends, and in scenes that I saw in museums and doctor's offices and supermarkets and parks and everywhere there are children. And I had this bulging file of vignettes that just mesmerized me. And one day, when my son, who's now in his 30s, was 15 years old, I had a very hard time containing myself when he refused to do something that I wanted him to do. And I had this flash of wishing I could just scoop him up and remove him from the door before he was going to leave and bring him back to his playpen. And at that moment, I realized that the same conflicts between coming close and letting go, attachment and exploration, being free and being connected, play out again and again and again from toddlerhood to adolescence to adulthood to older age. And that launched me into wanting to put all those vignettes together, give them a frame, and start thinking systematically about the threads of development that start in toddlerhood and then continue for the rest of our lives. And when Simon & Schuster approached me and said, you know, the first edition has been in press for 25 years, what about an update? I was very happy because by then we had learned so much more about brain development, theory of mind, what to do about tablet exposure and social media exposure and use of iPhones, what to do about helping children or toddlers negotiate stressful and traumatic situations, how to think about non-traditional families, how to think about the increasing diversity in our society. And so the second edition gave me an opportunity to reflect on those issues and also to reflect on the developmental differences between being a mother, which I was when I wrote the first edition, and being a grandmother. And I have now a new empathy for how beleaguered young parents are often because of the lack of support that they often experience from the rest of society in raising their little ones. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to think with you and to talk together about our joint efforts to help parents and caregivers and grandparents and helping toddlers to grow up healthy and happy.
Wonderful, Alicia. Thank you so much for giving us that introduction into the emotional life of a toddler. Um, your personal story, it just adds so much more value to this discussion. I'm looking forward to hear what the questions bring out also. But now
Thank
let's go around. Go ahead. Oh, yes. Now let's go around, and everyone in the audience today, please think of your questions or comments. And when you're ready, remember to use the raise your hand feature in the GoToWebinar control panel. And we'll let you know when you're unmuted and you can ask your question. You can also submit your questions through text using the chat feature or the question feature if you prefer, and we'll read them out loud. So let's get to it. We have our first question, and it comes from Miss Galia Fishman. Forgive me in advance if I mispronounce anyone's name, but Miss Fishman, we're going to unmute you now and you can ask your question. And you can unmute yourself if you're available.
Hi, sorry, I had a technical problem. I'm just enjoying so much, and I probably pressed the wrong button. I'm just having fun to listen. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
That's great. And I wish I could see the audience and I could see you all. It's so much more fun when we can see each other, but that's not what the technology is giving us today.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Fishman. Do we have anyone else who'd like to ask a question or raise their hand? Or any comments for
This is Julia. I'm going to jump back in here because one of the things that we talked about a little bit on the Member Connect chat during the month was one of the passages about, basically great parents who had tried to be extraordinarily responsive. I think the case was a little girl, named Nadia, and her parents had really tried to kind of always be responsive to her needs, really be there and present. She seemed to really kind of need that from them in order to stay, kind of keep herself in check, and that it had basically left her completely unprepared for dealing with other toddlers. And that when she went in and was, one-on-one with another 2-year-old who was not eager to respond to what she was, wanted, that really became a place of conflict. And, I think in her case, it sounded like biting was an issue, this sort of thing. And it made me think of a story that of my own son's development, and that was years and years ago now, but where he was about 3 and in a classroom with other 3-year-olds, and he was very and he bit another child, and thankfully it was the one and only time it happened, but it was such a surprise because it seemed so out of character in our mind. And the very astute teacher who knew both my son and the other child so well was just spot on, knew exactly what was happening and essentially, or what had happened. And essentially it was that my son was very verbal. He was used to having this conversation around things like sharing a toy and being able to kind of make his case for why it was his turn and why he was not giving it up. And not only was the other 3-year-old boy, not as verbal, but his first language wasn't English. And so he probably just had no idea what my son was up to. And it both of them totally confused by each other's readiness and kind of motivated by their own need. It was just such a gift to have a teacher who could not only translate Toddler, for us, but also then help them go on to navigate their own relationship better. And it, again, literally was the one and only time it happened. So it made me think of so many times at which, we're kind of thinking about this from that kind of visceral reaction toddler behavior that you described, Alicia, like, oh, this makes me worried, like my child's a biter. And really getting down and getting into the analysis of it and really trying to understand it is so much more valuable, especially when you're really in that moment of your own reactions.
As I was listening to you, I was thinking that the toddler period is really the time when we start learning the rules of the game. And when the rules of the game are one set of rules in our house and then become a different set of rules in childcare or in a peer group, then toddlers are daunted by the differences in the rules. And it takes them a while to figure out what rules apply where. It's interesting that I've now had the opportunity to stand by observing children's development from the time they were born until, they are now in their 20s, 30s. And I've noticed that parents who are very, very, very permissive and unconditionally responsive often tend to have children who continue to long in different settings for that kind of unconditional setting of the rules, and they're being the ones that persuade, cajole, and eventually get things to be the way they want them to be. And even in adolescence or in early adulthood, they continue to feel befuddled when their girlfriend or boyfriend or teacher or professor at the university or friends do not do things the way the child wants them to do things. And so it's really given me a lot of uh, opportunity to think about how in the early childhood community, we emphasize a lot the importance of responsiveness, empathy, support. We don't emphasize enough, I think, the importance of supportive, loving, realistic socialization, so that through our empathic acknowledgement that they cannot have what they want, and sometimes we cannot give them what they want, they start kind of getting immunized, inoculated against the inevitable disappointments that they're going to get exposed to in other settings. And so in a way, my whole approach to toddlers and to the treatment of toddlers and preschoolers has to do with how do we create a respectful acknowledgement of the parent's agenda, the teacher's agenda, the child's agenda, and how do we build bridges between these different agendas, keeping in mind the child's developmental needs, but also keeping in mind what the adults need to do and to accomplish in their everyday life. And I think that your example was a really good example of that. Do you agree? Are there other thoughts about this? I'm eager to hear what the audience thinks about this approach, because we all have pretty strong opinions about what's good for children. And I'd love to hear your opinions as well.
Thank you so much, Alicia. I'm curious, we do have a hand raised, and I'm curious if Rebecca Burns' question relates at all to what you were just expressing to us. So, Rebecca, I'm going to unmute you, and you have free range to ask your question.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Lieberman, wonderful to meet you and see you. And yes,
Alicia.
okay. So yeah, actually my question is related, and I'm really glad you brought up, given the developmental level of the child, how, setting boundaries and having respect for other people and things, even at an early age, creates a sense of responsibility within the toddler and the young child. My question actually has to do with the proliferation of the tablets and the screens in our environment.
Yes.
And then over the time that you've had to observe young children, I am not a grandmother yet, but I am a great aunt. And yes. I am getting asked that question by my niece. And so I'd like you to just sort of reflect on that observation, and then how to help young parents with setting that boundary with their children.
Yes, that is such an important question, and the book actually has a whole section on that. because it really is a very key issue in modern parenting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to reflect a little bit on this. As you might remember, the American Academy of Pediatrics some time ago had a policy of no tablets for children under 2.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a policy that was widely disregarded by parents. And so it's been adapted now, and it's a more flexible policy. And I was asked when the American Academy of Pediatrics was getting ready to make the policy more flexible, or the recommendations more flexible, I was asked by a group of early childhood practitioners to join in writing a letter to the Academy asking that they do not change the policy of recommending no tablet access for children under 2. And I explained that I did not feel able to sign a letter like that because in my own observations, with friends, with family, in museums, in buses, in the world, I had seen parents negotiate tablet use and iPhone use with their toddlers in a way that impressed me deeply, made me think that this new generation of parents is bringing to tablets the kind of approach that we used to bring at their age to the use of books, for example, and that they use it both as a way of keeping the child entertained in situations where where the parent has to divide attention, but also as an interactive tool where they focus together on the content of the tablet. They used it as a way of accessing content. And so I thought that rather than having clear-cut guidelines, we should really, or recommendations, we should really engage in a dialogue about retaining a sense of reciprocity in this exchange, where children see us using tablets and they want to be like us. They learn by imitation. They want to do what we do. They want to be like us. And so they relate to tablets the way we relate to tablets. And it seems to me that provided tablets are not used at the expense of interpersonal relationships, attention to the baby and to the toddler, that they can become one more tool in raising toddlers. And I'm wondering whether this makes sense to you, or the audience, whether there are different points of view. But I trust the wisdom of parents in remaining attuned to their children's needs, in using tablets as one more accessory. And I would urge them to create tablet-free times, because I think that tablets can also serve as a vehicle for distraction. And I think that distracted parenting is often a vehicle for frustrated toddlers and for a sense of disconnect between parents and toddlers.
Thank you so much for going into more depth about the use of tablets and technology in parenting, Alicia. We have another question and from our question box from Mr. Peter Miller. His question is, what happens during toddlerhood is affected by earlier brain development issues from pregnancy to perinatal and early childhood years, and family history of social, financial, economic, racial disparities, and ACEs. How can parents, child care providers, and pediatricians cooperate to look at both past and current histories to improve toddler outcomes?
What a wise statement. Seems to me more a statement than a question, really, because it has the kernel of the answer in it. And it seems to me that what you are saying is that as we look at a child's behavior, at a child's functioning, we ask ourselves, who is the total child? Who's the whole child here? What happened to this child in the past? What are the current circumstances of the child? What are the relationships that the child can count on? What are the stresses that occur in the family and the environment? What are the sources of strength in the family and the environment? And I think that this is really something that is speaking to the search for meaning in toddlers' behavior and a search for understanding of what are the contributors. And it seems to me that it's creating relationships with the parents and asking parents about their experiences and the child's experiences and creating with them a safe space where they can tell us about what happened to them, what happened to the child, what are the sources of joy and the sources of worry, the sources of stress, that can start creating a narrative of how have we come to this point, what are the issues that we need to address, and what are the areas that we want to strengthen and sustain.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Thank you again. And Peter, we hope that, you can dive in deeper on the question yourself, because like Alicia said, it's a very powerful statement that you made, and it's good for thought for all of us as parents, as providers, as educators, as researchers, and onward. So thank you again, Alicia. Yes.
And to answer, just to add a little bit, this
Mhm.
is a question where every one of the items that was mentioned is worth several chapters. And that's exactly what I wanted to do with the second edition. Really elaborate and go in depth into what are these issues and how can we understand them and how do we look at a particular moment in the child's behavior and bring to bear those different factors in our efforts at understanding.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alicia. Definitely enjoyed this read and looking forward to your next productions. We have another question. Yes. We have another question from a hand raised by Miss Ellen Cocker. Ellen, we're going to unmute you and you are free to ask Alicia your question.
Hi, it's Ellen Coker.
Okay,
Just
sorry about that. Thank you.
That's all right. It's just like the soda with an R. And I have used your book for at least 10 years in a class that I teach and in working with infants and toddler teachers. And the stories are so meaningful, and it gives such a place to reflect on how maybe that child might remind a teacher of a child they're working with. And it is such a beautiful style of writing that you have, that a wide range of levels of readers have made such meaning of your book. So I was so excited when when I heard that there was a new edition, because somebody said to me, Ellen, this book is kind of old. And I said, well, I think the stories are so meaningful. Let's just try a couple of the stories and see if you find meaning. and every time they do, so now I won't have to sell. It will be new. And some of the young staff really want new things, and that's inspiring. They want the best. They want to know the best. So I didn't really have a question. I love all of the book, and I love the updates, the pieces about culture and the pieces about screen time, and because we all kind of struggle with at what place is it enough interaction? How long of time? I think that might be an interesting question. Is there an amount of time, or do we let the child's behavior guide us? But I see them being so captivated and for extended periods by any screen pieces.
That is, yes, absolutely, absolutely. That is such an important question. How much time? And I think that the answer also is that sometimes parents find it so easy to use the child being captivated as a great reason to not take it away. Because then you take it away and they yell and scream and they get mad. And so I think that tablets really epitomize that conflict that parents and children always have about, I want something for longer than I can have it, and I don't like transitions. And so I think that, and because we talked at the beginning about socialization, right? And socialization involves also problem solving and conflict resolution, and preparing the child in advance for how long they can do something and then what will happen next, and breaking down what their experience will be into little manageable pieces that they can anticipate and respond to. And so it seems to me that each parent can think deeply about who their child is, what the family routine is, what the stresses that they have in their lives, how much they need to divide their attention, for instance, between the toddler and other children when they are at home, and come to a set of guidelines for themselves about what makes sense and how they are going to abide by those guidelines that they set for themselves. And there are wonderful tools. 0 to 3 has created tools. There is a website that I cite in the book that I forget the name of right now. It's London-based, and the author is Alicia Lieberman. That is based on interviews with thousands of parents who have been grappling with these issues and have come to guidelines that work for themselves and their toddlers.
Thank you for elaborating, Alicia. I think our next question would be a good follow-up for you. It's from Miss Kennedy, and it reads, have you found that parents are relieved to learn that there is value in at times not being always responsive or accepting of all things, but that parents have a responsibility and there's a social benefit to setting boundaries?
I find that they really are very relieved. And sometimes they don't quite believe us when we tell them that, because they have been socialized so much to think that the only way of raising children well and being good parents is being unfailingly responsive. And I think that is one of the overgeneralizations from attachment theory. And here I want to give my deep thanks to Mary Ainsworth, who was one of my teachers, and to John Bowlby, who was one of my teachers, for creating and testing attachment theory. And we have to remember that the bulk of attachment theory has to do with the first year of life. The research that Mary Ainsworth published about the importance of maternal sensitivity in creating secure attachments has to do with the first year of life, with babies and parents being observed every 3 weeks in home environments, and then the children and the mom being assessed in the strange situation when the child was 12 months old, and mothers that were more responsive, more sensitive, more aware, more attuned to their children's signals of need had babies that were more securely attached. After that seminal research was done, Beatrice Beebe did a study that was much more fine-grained in the sense that she looked at micro moments, moment to moment to moment video analysis of mother-baby interaction at 3 months of age and attachment security at 12 months of age. And she found that it was actually the responsiveness in the middle range that was best associated with secure attachment. In other words, when mothers were responding to every signal of the child, the children tended to be a little more likely to have insecure attachment, and so did children whose mothers did not respond to them. But the ones who responded, about 50 to 70% of the time, were the ones that were most likely to have securely attached children. And of course, that depends also on the child's temperament. There are children that are sturdier, and there are other children who are more vulnerable and who need more immediate attention before they can regulate themselves. But this is a way of saying that the research is actually showing that giving children space to test their own muscles and to figure out how to cope with frustration in relation to the parent, but also in relation to themselves, it actually builds sturdier personalities than unfailing availability and responsiveness.
Thank you, Alicia. So we're going to backtrack a little. We have a comment on the use of tablets. Michelle Simmons, she made a comment that says, I love this perspective on tablet use. I have watched friends utilize tablets and phones as a way to keep the family together. For example, during times of deployment, or as my family uses them, the kids can look at all the pictures and talk about memories and those family members that are not often around.
That is so beautiful. Thank you for that example. It is so true.
Yes, and furthermore, Miss Kennedy announced, commented also on tablet use. She says, your comments concerning tablets, it makes sense to me. They are balanced and reflective. Today, though, I lying ahead of a young child in a stroller who was being pushed by a caregiver based on the appearance of the child and babysitter. But this observation isn't unique to caregivers. The child was crying long and loud enough that I quickly turned to see what was wrong. The caregiver was busy pushing the stroller and simultaneously looking at her iPhone. Gradually, the child stopped crying. The caregiver's attention didn't waver from her iPhone, but a block later, the caregiver saw other presumably caregivers with children in strollers and greeted those caregivers warmly and enthusiastically. This observation was a bit unsettling, and it got me wondering, what experiences have you had with parents and caregivers to think about their use of tablets, cell phones, and cell phones that may make them perhaps too unavailable to their and toddlers and toddler parents, and so that
Yeah.
parents can engage their children. Can you explain perhaps what they are doing?
One of the things that I tell myself when I see scenes like that is this is a distressing scene in and of itself. But before I can make a determination about how to think about it, I want to see to what extent is this the hallmark of how this caregiver interacts with this baby. In other words, there have been times that we have all been distracted, where we had an emergency response from the office, for example, or from another family member where we needed to pay attention. And we have not been able to be flexibly available both to the child and to this request. And so the fact that it happened once doesn't mean that it is the rule for the interaction between this particular caregiver and this particular child. There is no question that there is a continuum between engaged, growth promoting parenting and distracted, dismissive parenting. And all our efforts really need to be devoted to helping parents become more engaged with their children when we find that they really prioritize other concerns so consistently that their children end up being emotionally neglected or physically neglected or not sufficiently responded to generate a sense of connectivity and pleasure and reciprocity in interaction. And this goes back to an earlier question about how we need to try to look at all the factors that might be at play, including how characteristic this particular moment is of the entire interaction. But I certainly agree that when it is characteristic of the entire interaction, we wish that we could play a helpful role in helping the caregiver have more pleasure in interacting with the child.
Yes, definitely agree with your sentiments, Alicia. We have another raised hand, so we're going to unmute Miss Leslie Barker so that she can ask you a question.
Hi, Alicia. And I just wanted to start by thanking 0 to 3 for putting this on. This is just a fabulous way of connecting and to get to know each other and to build on our skills and our knowledge. So thank you for that. I'm a nurse and parenting educator. I've been in the business of doing all of this stuff for over 35 years, and I too have always loved the toddlers. They're my favorite age group, that's for sure. In 2008, I did a facilitator. I've been involved in a lot of resource development, and in 2008, I did a facilitators resource guide called Terrific Toddlers, and I used your original book extensively, and just happened to get a membership recently to 0 to 3 and saw that you had updated your book because I'm just revising that manual. So I thought, how timely is this? So I will certainly be happy to be referencing that as I
Thank you. Thank you.
resource changes.
Congratulations on what you are doing.
Oh yes, it's an exciting opportunity. I also work with an international program. It's called Positive Discipline in Everyday Parenting. And we're really trying to make that paradigm shift to help parents to understand discipline as teaching and guidance as opposed to punishing. And I just wondered if you would maybe comment a little on your thoughts on that sort of shifting view of the topic and how it's how you've found that working with families of toddlers, you know, because toddlers could be an exasperating time for parents, and how we're finding that if you can help parents to sort of learn how to self-regulate themselves, then they're in a calmer place to be able to approach their children. Because these people are just learning how to do all of this stuff, right? And we're finding that with the increasing knowledge and helping parents to understand the knowledge about how the brain is developing, that's a helpful thing for them to see that these skills are just gradually building over time. So just kind of tossing that out and asking if you wanted to reflect a little bit on what's been your experience. You've been with parenting and working in this field for a long time, so I'm sure you've seen lots of change in how we treat children and how, you know, we've gone from the spanking, swatting thing to timeout to, you know, taking things away from children to now really trying to understand discipline as a teaching, calming down, problem solving, conflict resolution kind of thing. So I'll leave that.
Thank you. One of the things that has always been very helpful as parents describe to me their forms of discipline, and they come to consult because the child is out of control, the parents themselves don't have any pleasure in their toddlers, everybody's fighting with each other, they feel like they are at their wits' end, and they tell me everything that the child does, and then I ask, and how do you respond when the child does that? What have you tried? And they might tell me, I spank him, I yell at him, I tell him that whatever, and I ask, how does that work? Has that helped? And they often stop in their tracks and said, no, it hasn't helped. And that's why we're here, lady. Can you give us some tools that help? And then that gives us an opportunity, that gives me an opportunity to ask, how were you raised? How were you taught what to do and what not to do when you were children? And often they tell me, well, I was spanked. And that creates a dialogue about what that felt like, what do they remember, and is this what they want for their children? I think that creating empathy for the parents' experience in terms of how the parents came to this place of raising the child in this way, and as they reconnect with their own sense of fear, frustration, being overwhelmed, gives us an opening to say, let's take time and practice ways that might work. And then we talk about how much children want to please their parents. Have they tried praise when the child does something well? Often they feel like praise is going to be spoiling their children. And so we create mini moments where we actually practice these recommendations with the child, and then we observe together how the child responds, and that in turn often changes the perception of that the parents have of the child, and they move from a punitive approach to a more interactive teaching discipline approach. One thing that amazes parents is how positively children respond to being given an alternative to things that they cannot do. And they say, well, that's very easy. When I don't want him to do this, You mean I can just redirect his attention to something else that he also likes? And there is such a fear of spoiling the child that once that fear is dispelled and rephrased in the form of creating a partnership between parent and child about what works and how they want to get along with each other, I think it changes the climate in the family. And I think that that's also what you are talking about, right?
Hi, Alicia. Alicia, sorry, we did put Leslie back on mute. Leslie, did you want to make a quick
Thank
comment?
you. I heard that I'm unmuted, so thank you, Alicia. And I just typed you a note. That is a very helpful approach, and absolutely, it's what we're trying to expand as we do this work with families. And it's really a lot of unlearning kind of old ways that we are have been using, and thinking about new, more positive ways. And really, you know, when you look around the world and the state the world is in, we could all use a little bit of conflict resolution, couldn't we? So thank you so much, and thank you again for your book. I just really, it's really fabulous to have it and to have such a new edition.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Alicia and Leslie, for posting that question for us. Alicia, we have less than 10 minutes and we have many questions left, but we'd like to get...
I'll try to be shorter in my answers. I'm sorry.
No, it is okay. It just shows the passion and need for the work. No need to apologize. So the first one, we're going to try to ask 2, maybe 3 more questions before we sign off for the afternoon. The first one comes from Miss Michelle Simmons. She says, I love the section of the book that talks about divorce. Based on your experiences and expertise, if you could train every family court judges in the nation, what would you teach them about custody arrangement that focuses on what is best for the child rather than adult focus?
Yes, I would ask judges to remember that children need permission to love both parents, particularly when both parents are good enough parents, and that in divorce, the perception that parents have of each other is clouded by their own personal disappointments, that the marriage did not succeed. And often the personal disappointment that they have in their spouse becomes generalized to a disappointment in the spouse as a parent. And yet toddlers do forgive a lot in their parents. They do forgive us for our departures from perfection if we can keep them safe and connected. And so the question of how to help parents give permission to each other and to themselves to have the child retain a connection with both parents, I think that is very hard work and very important work. It is reconciling ambivalence and reconciling conflict and finding ways of living together, collaborating together in spite of negative feelings. And that really is what toddlers and children need in every area of their lives, and most of all in situations when the parents are divorced.
Yes, thank you, Alicia. That expresses the need for the coaching that parents need in the process of divorce and extreme changes also. We'll go ahead and do one more question. And we apologize for all the questions we couldn't get to. We want to ask a question from Miss Elizabeth Kennedy, and it reads, do you think that looking at a child's insecure attachment or problems with emotional regulation through a lens of physiology might put more definitive parameters around best practices? Might it give a less subjective approach to parenting?
I think parenting will remain an art as well as a science because there are so many individual differences in the goodness of fit between parents and children, and in the areas of stress between parents and children, and the factors that create an insecure attachment can vary from dyad to dyad, and how to address those factors would depend very much in the relationship that we're able to form as providers with parents and with their children. So I think that there will always be a combination that is needed between science and neuroscience and research and the individual relationships that we create with each other.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Alicia. We did get another question in that we think is very timely, and we wanted to make sure we asked it before we got off the line with you. And that question is from Miss Andrea Rothenberg, and it is, what about children who spend much of the first 3 years of life in an orphanage due to parental death, illness, or inability to care for their child? How does this affect them? How do we begin to deal with what is going on with the children separated from their parents at the border?
It's a very big question. I just had an interview reflecting on that. We do know from the work of Charlie Zina and Chuck Nelson with children in orphanages in Romania that it does affect those 3 years in an orphanage, does affect brain development, does affect cognitive development, does affect social and emotional functioning, does affect children's capacity to form trusting relationships, to explore and learn. We also know that from that research that early intervention, loving parents, placing them in with caregivers that are devoted to them, committed to them, able to provide them with reparative experiences, can create a sea change in the cognitive, emotional, and social functioning of those children. That children really blossom when their circumstances become more favorable. The situation of children in the border is a microcosm of everything that can go wrong in terms of cruel and sudden, unpredictable separations, and then placing children with caregivers that are often untrained, too many children for too few caregivers, so that there can't be individual attention provided. And there is now a groundswell of national effort to come to the border to provide, to witness, to serve as witnesses to what is happening and to look for opportunities to make a difference. And the difference will be made through reunification of children with their families, and then patient coaching of parents and children back into a sense of trust with each other. But that is a huge enterprise, and we are in the middle of a crisis. And I am sorry to say that we can hope, but we also cannot just rely on hope. We have to make very significant changes that make sure that that doesn't happen again.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Lieberman. Like, hope without action, it's almost like a dream deferred. So thank you, Dr. Lieberman,
Thank you very
for
much.
your time. Thank you for providing us with an excellent discussion around the emotional life of the toddler. Thank you all for who joined us. Especially thank you to you all.
Thank you very much for
Yeah.
coming. Thank you so much for your very good questions, and my apologies for those that I couldn't answer. Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Lieberman.
Thank
And
you, Mari.
for everyone.
Thank you, Zero to See.
Yes, no problem. And for everyone else, we thank you for joining us for this first installment of the 0 to 3 Summer Book Club series. As a reminder, all of our virtual events are always free for you as a member, and you also have ongoing access to all of our past virtual events and your member exclusive resources. On behalf of 0 to 3, thank you all for joining us, and keep in mind our upcoming book club for the month of July. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Alicia.
Thank you, Julia.
Have a great day.
Thank you. How do you think it went?
Maria, are we off?
No.